There are moments in a believer's life when silence becomes heavier than any spoken sentence, when prayer feels like it is slipping into an empty sky, when the one you once trusted with all your wounds suddenly seems distant, hidden, unreachable. You look at your life and realize that the places where you expected comfort became places of confusion, and the spaces where you once felt guided now feel dim and unmoving. You begin to ask questions you never thought would cross your mind. Why does God allow this? Why does He feel close to others but far from me? Why do my prayers feel thinner than they used to? And in that quiet place where your heart trembles, you start interpreting His silence as abandonment. This is a wound that does not shout. It grows slowly, quietly, in the background of long nights and tired mornings. It forms when the weight of life keeps pressing, but heaven seems to give no reply. It is a wound that convinces you that you are alone, that your faith has cracked, that something in you has failed. But here is the truth beneath that fear. The silence you feel is not evidence of God's absence. It is evidence of your exhaustion, your overload, your long seasons of carrying more than your heart was built to hold. You are not weak, you are overwhelmed. You are not abandoned, you are stretched. You are not forgotten, you are forming. When the soul goes through deep internal change, the familiar ways of sensing God often shift. The old ways stop working before the new ones take shape. And in that gap, the mind panics. You think something has gone wrong, when in reality, something is being rebuilt. God's silence is not punishment, it is preparation. It is the place where your faith stops being a habit and becomes something quieter, deeper, more rooted. It is where trust learns to breathe without constant reassurance. It is where love becomes mature enough to stand even when it does not feel held. Feeling abandoned by God is not a spiritual failure, it is a human experience. Every saint, every priest, every believer who ever tried to walk in the light has known this valley. Not because God walks away, but because spiritual growth moves us through seasons where He teaches us to hear Him beyond emotion, beyond sensation, beyond certainty. You are not losing God, you are outgrowing an earlier way of experiencing Him. When you were spiritually younger, God often spoke to you in ways that felt immediate, warm, unmistakable. As you grew, He began speaking more in truth than feeling, more in depth than comfort, more in endurance than reassurance. And when that shift happens, the heart misreads it. You assume distance, when what is really happening is transformation. There is a kind of love that God gives only through His silence, because silence creates space for strength, space for inner dignity, space for the kind of faith that does not collapse when life becomes unpredictable. God is not testing whether you love Him. He is strengthening the part of you that will need to remain standing in the seasons ahead. You may feel abandoned, but that feeling is not the verdict. Feelings interpret the moment. God interprets your future. And He knows that the future you are walking toward requires a heart that understands Him, even when He is quiet. Look at your life honestly. The times you felt closest to God were not always the easiest. They were the times when something inside you opened, softened, surrendered. But now you are carrying fatigue, pressure, disappointments, unanswered questions, emotional weight that makes your heart less open, less able to feel what is still present. Nothing is wrong with you. Nothing is broken in you. You are simply tired, deeply, spiritually, humanly tired. And tired hearts lose sensitivity, not because God steps back, but because the soul's strength runs thin. When you feel abandoned by God, you are usually standing at the threshold of the next depth of your spiritual life. You are on the edge of a quieter faith, a steadier trust, a deeper identity. You are being invited into the kind of relationship with God that does not rely on constant evidence, because it is built on something stronger than emotion. It is built on truth. This is not the end of your faith. This is the moment where it begins to mature. This is not abandonment. This is the formation of a heart that will one day know God not only in His presence, but even in His silence. When you feel abandoned by God, there is a quiet reflex inside you that begins to question your own worth, as if divine silence is a reflection of your failures. You start replaying old mistakes, old hesitations, old sins, searching for some hidden reason why God would withdraw from you. This is the human heart trying to turn pain into logic, trying to create a cause and effect explanation for an experience that is not rooted in punishment at all. God does not abandon His children, but the mind, when exhausted, begins to interpret silence as rejection. And once that feeling takes root, it colors everything. You stop praying with trust and begin praying with fear. You stop asking boldly and start asking apologetically, as if you are intruding on a love that once embraced you freely. You start shrinking your hopes, shrinking your expectations, shrinking even your identity as a child of God. But listen closely. The silence you fear is not evidence that God is disappointed in you. It is evidence that He is inviting you into a deeper understanding of yourself. A person who is spiritually forming begins to encounter moments where God seems to dim the outer lights so that the inner ones can awaken. The outer signs fade so the inward strength can rise. What you feel as abandonment is actually an invitation to grow beyond spiritual childhood. It is not a dismissal, it is a transition. Think of your life right now. You have survived seasons that would have shattered many people. You have carried responsibilities that no one fully knows. You have endured losses that left marks on the way you breathe. You have walked through uncertainties that stripped you bare. And through all of that, your faith did not disappear. It trembled, it weakened, it questioned, but it did not disappear. A heart that can survive that much carries a depth God trusts. And when God trusts a soul deeply, He begins to lead it in quieter ways, not because He loves you less, but because He sees how much you have grown, and He knows you are ready for more than emotional reassurance. You are ready for spiritual clarity. The feeling of abandonment often arises when your old ways of relating to God can no longer support your new spiritual capacity. You are being expanded from within. Your interior world is being stretched. Your spirit is being prepared for a deeper kind of listening. But the preparation does not feel like preparation. It feels like loss. It feels like emptiness. It feels like something has been taken away. And the enemy of your soul uses that moment to whisper the oldest lie. You are alone now. But you are not alone. You are in the middle of a sacred shift, a reorientation of the inner life that happens to every believer who walks the long road of faith. Look again at your life. You have not been abandoned. The provision you needed still came, even if it arrived late. The strength you needed still emerged, even when you felt too weak. The guidance you prayed for eventually appeared, even if you could not feel it at first. Your story is woven with moments where God carried you without your awareness. Why would He stop now? His silence is not the silence of absence. It is the silence of a father who is teaching his child how to walk without constantly holding his hand. A child who never lets go does not grow. A soul that never feels silence never learns to trust beyond emotion. And a believer who never walks through spiritual darkness never discovers how bright grace can become in the human heart. The sense of abandonment you feel is not a verdict, it is a threshold. You are stepping into a more mature relationship with God, one where your identity does not crumble when your feelings shift, one where you learn to distinguish emotion from truth, one where you stand in faith not because you feel held, but because you know you are held. This is the quiet dignity God is forming in you, the strength to remain steady even when the heavens feel still. It is not a punishment. It is not confirmation of your fears. It is the slow building of a deeper foundation. And when this foundation is complete, you will look back and realize that God was closest to you in the very moments when you felt the most alone. His silence was not a withdrawal, it was a shelter. His stillness was not rejection, it was the rearranging of your interior world. And his hiddenness was not abandonment, it was the way he prepared your heart to recognize him in a new way. There is a moment in every season of spiritual emptiness when you stop fighting the silence and start listening to it. Not because it suddenly feels holy, but because your strength to resist runs out. And in that tired surrender, something subtle begins to shift. You start noticing that the silence is not cold, it is spacious, it is not condemning, it is clarifying. It is not the silence of someone who has turned away, it is the silence of someone who is inviting you to hear differently. When you feel abandoned by God, your instinct is to look for him in the places where he felt familiar, in the warmth, in the reassurance, in the emotional closeness you used to feel. But God rarely repeats the same form of comfort for too long. Not because it was wrong, but because he is always leading you toward a deeper freedom, a deeper identity, a deeper truth about who you are and who he is. And sometimes that truth can only be learned in silence. You are not meant to live on borrowed feelings forever. You are meant to grow into a faith that can stand even when your emotions contradict it. And the only way that kind of faith forms is through seasons where you feel like God is not answering. But think about this carefully. If God were truly absent, you would be collapsing, not searching. You would be indifferent, not longing. You would be numb, not aching. The ache you feel is not the ache of abandonment. It is the ache of a heart that still believes. The longing you feel is not the longing of a soul that has been rejected. It is the longing of a soul that senses something beyond what it can currently perceive. Your heart is reaching because God has not left you. The very desire for him is evidence of his nearness. A soul abandoned by God would not seek him at all. Your search is proof of his presence, not his absence. Silence is the place where faith becomes personal. It is where you stop relying on momentum and start relying on truth. It is where your prayer becomes less about receiving and more about being. It is where your identity becomes anchored not in what you feel, but in what is real. And what is real is this: God does not step away from his children. He strengthens them by walking with them in ways they cannot always sense. Look at the saints, the ones whose lives shaped the history of faith. Every one of them walked through periods of spiritual darkness. Every one of them knew the ache of silence. Every one of them felt the fear that perhaps they had been left alone. But what defined them was not the absence of this experience. It was the way they endured it with quiet dignity, trusting that God's silence had purpose, trusting that their feelings were not the whole truth, trusting that the light would return. And it did. It always does. Your light will return too, but it will not return in the same form. It will return deeper, steadier, quieter. You will find that the silence that once terrified you will become the space where you finally learn to breathe without fear. You will discover that what you thought was abandonment was actually the dismantling of the old structures of your spiritual life. And in their place, God is building something stronger. Silence reveals the hidden attachments of the heart. It shows you where you depended too much on emotion, too much on certainty, too much on immediate answers. It uncovers the places where you prayed more for relief than for relationship, more for reassurance than for truth. It gently loosens your grip on the version of God you constructed so that you can encounter the God who actually is. And encountering God in truth requires a heart that has walked through silence. You might not feel strong right now, but look at what you are enduring. Look at the questions you are holding. Look at the hope that still flickers, even when you feel lost. That is not weakness. That is the resilience of a soul being shaped. You are not failing God. You are learning Him. You are learning how to stay when your emotions leave. You are learning how to trust when your certainty fades. You are learning how to walk when the light dims. This is not abandonment. This is discipleship. You are being taught how to lean on God with a depth that cannot be shaken by circumstance or feeling. And as you keep walking, even through the silence, something inside you will begin to steady. Not in a dramatic flash, but in a quiet, grounded strength that grows day by day. You will wake up one morning and realize that the fear has softened, that the despair has thinned, that the emptiness has stopped echoing. Not because everything became easy, but because you became different. You became steadier. You became clearer. You became someone who walks with God even when the path feels hidden. This is the quiet miracle of spiritual growth. You do not notice it while it is happening. But when the silence ends, you realize it was shaping you in every hour. And you will see that God never left you. Not for a moment. He was working in the shadows of your soul, building something you will one day recognize as the very strength you prayed for long ago. When the season of silence has lasted long enough, something gentle begins to awaken in you. Something that does not come from emotion or reassurance or signs, but from a deeper interior truth that grows quietly beneath the surface. You begin to sense that maybe God was not gone after all. Maybe He was working in a part of you that feeling could not reach. Your thoughts start to clear. Your fears begin to lose authority. The weight that once pressed on your chest slowly becomes lighter, not because your circumstances changed, but because your heart has learned to stand differently within them. This is the quiet fruit of the valley you've been walking through. A faith that is no longer shaped by immediacy, but by endurance. A trust that no longer depends on sensation, but on reality. A relationship with God that is no longer fragile, but steady. And in that new steadiness, you begin to understand something profound. Something you could not have understood while the silence still frightened you. You realize that God was not withholding Himself. He was revealing you. He was showing you the strength you didn't know you had, the resilience you didn't know was forming, the depth you didn't know was growing. He was shaping a heart capable of carrying more light than before. The kind of faith that emerges from silence is different from the faith that comes from comfort. Comfort grows gratitude. Silence grows wisdom. Comfort teaches you that God is good. Silence teaches you that God is present even when you cannot feel His goodness. Comfort makes you thankful. Silence makes you unshakable. God allowed you to walk through this darkness not to break you, but to build you into someone who can walk with Him in every season, not only when He feels close, but also when He feels hidden. And that is one of the highest forms of spiritual maturity, the ability to remain steady even when heaven is still. You may not realize it yet, but you are carrying more dignity now than when this began. You are standing with a quieter strength. Your soul has more room in it. Your prayer has less desperation and more sincerity. Your trust has less fear and more truth. This is the work God does in silence. He does not create doubt, He refines it. He does not create fear, He purifies it. He does not abandon you, He teaches you how to walk without collapsing when you cannot feel His hand. And now, as this season begins to shift, your heart is becoming sensitive again, but in a new way. Not hypersensitive to emotion, but deeply sensitive to presence. Not easily moved by fear, but quietly moved by grace. You start noticing the small things, a peace that arrives without explanation, a strength that appears when you expect it to fall, a clarity that forms in moments when you were certain confusion would win. These are not coincidences, they are signs that the light is returning. But it is returning differently. It is not flashing, it is settling. It is not overwhelming, it is grounding. It is not loud, it is deep. And as the light returns, you begin to see something you missed before. God was closest to you in the nights when you felt most alone. He was holding the parts of you that could not hold themselves. He was guarding you from despair, even when despair sat on your shoulders. He was carrying your faith when your own strength could not lift it. The silence that once terrified you is now the space where you learned who God truly is and who you truly are in Him. And as you step out of this valley, something quiet but powerful remains in you. A new truth, a new steadiness, a new dignity. You will still have days of confusion. You will still have questions. But you will not break the way you once did. You will not panic the way you once did. You will not fear God's silence the way you once feared it. Because now you understand that silence does not mean distance. Silence does not mean disappointment. Silence does not mean abandonment. Silence is one of the languages God uses to prepare the heart for deeper light. And He has been preparing you. You have grown in ways no one can see. You have matured in ways you did not recognize. You have been shaped into someone who can walk with God even in the hidden places. And now, as the path slowly brightens again, carry this truth quietly inside you. You are not abandoned. You never were. You were being guided through a season that was meant to reveal your strength, deepen your faith, and draw you into a quieter, more resilient relationship with the one who has never left your side. Walk in the light, even on the days it feels distant.